Morning, everybody. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This morning, I'm going to be reacting to the complete history of the burning of Prospero, Warhammer 40k, and Horus Heresy lore made on the Oculus Imperia YouTube channel. And it was a request from Noble Knight House Hepatrex. This is part 3 of my reaction to this video. If you guys want to check out part 1 and part 2, remember that the Warhammer 40k content created by YouTubers reaction playlist card is going to be at the top there, and you'll be able to find part 1 and part 2 in that playlist. If you want to check out the original video as well as Oculus Imperia's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. Yes, part 1. We were dealing with Magnus the Red and his folly, his arrogance, his pride, led to the destruction of the Webway project and the Emperor ordering a censure of Magnus the Red and the 15th Legion. In this censure host, if I can say that, yes, it's been led by Leman Russ of the 6th Legion, the Space Wolves, as well as Constantine Valdo of the Custodians. However, the censure host has been beefed up, if I can say that, with Horus Lupercal also, the War Master, Horus Lupercal, also investing a lot of resources into the censure host in terms of experimental weapons, titans, even a part of his own 16th Legion, Sons of Horus, Astartes, are also joining in the censure host. And Constantine Valdo has also invited, or should I say, has also added the Sisters of Silence, the Order Sinister, Side Titans, and many other divisions of the Imperium of Man have also decided to contribute to the censure host. The censure host was primarily designed to arrest Magnus the Red and bring him back to Terra, but the censure host has become an armada that you would say is poised to destroy the planet of Prospero and all of its inhabitants. And that's what it looked like in part 1. In part 2, the censure host finally arrived in the orbit of Prospero. They sent a message to the surface demanding that Magnus the Red would to avail himself to be arrested so that he can be taken back to Terra. Nobody responded to the demand. But to Leman Russ's credit, he did wait. He was patient. I think for a few hours, or maybe it was a day, I can't remember, but he was patient, and they have been sending the message repeatedly on, on repeat, if I can say that, and nobody responded to the message. So Leman Russ lost his patience, and he ordered a bombardment of Prospero. Prospero began to burn the entire planet. The only place that was still standing, if I can say that, was the capital of Tesca. Tesca was protected by a Psyche shield, and as we all know, the Edict of Nicaea forbids Astartes from using their Psyche abilities, so you could say that the 15th Legion have condemned themselves a second time. But it's completely understandable because they were protecting their city. However, Leman Russ then decided that he was going to land forces on the planet, and the first contingent was the 6th Legion Space Wolves. They landed, they met resistance from the defense forces of the city, the Spire Guard. They were destroyed. The Spire Guard had no way of defending themselves against Space Wolves, against, Space Marines. The citizens of Tesca suffered the most. Innocent people died, infrastructure was destroyed, and the 15th Legion did not come out to defend their own city. They were in their pyramids by the orders of Magnus the Red. We don't know why Magnus is still in the pyramids. We don't know why he did not adhere to the censure host when they demanded that he would come out to be arrested. But yes, the 15th Legion stayed in the pyramids whilst the city was being destroyed and the citizens being killed, until a librarian called Isaac Araman decided that he was going to go out there and fight against the 6th Legion, with some of the 15th Legion Astartes also joining him in the effort. And then Constantine Valdor and his custodians began to land on the city as well. So there are two fronts that the defense forces have to deal with, the 6th Legion and the custodians. And it does not look good for the citizens, most importantly. You know, they are caught in the crossfire between these three opposing forces, and they are the ones who are going to suffer the most. Yeah. Let's see what happens now in part 3 of the complete history of the burning of Prospero. 3, 2, 1, go.
The Battle of Prospero was now several hours old. Local chronometers read 12:09, Prosperine noontime, as Constantine Valdor's advance from the spaceport first began in earnest. It was, however, difficult to tell, as across the city it appeared for all the world that night was beginning to fall. The opening orbital bombardment that had torched Prospero's biome had thrown clouds of ash and smoke into the atmosphere. But beyond that, the unnatural pall of a building etheric tempest was forming above the metropolis of the 15th Legion. The Thousand Sons had no intention of letting the censor host gain the upper hand in the battle, and in their fury turned to arts darker than any they had previously wielded. Grimoires, research journals, and experiments buried by prudence or morality were thrown open again in a mad rush to capitalize on anything that might kill more wolves.
I don't like the sound of that. I don't like the sound of that. I supported Isaac Araman in part 2, in his decision to defend the city, right? But now, now that we're hearing that the 15th Legion are now delving into psycho arts that were considered to be immoral, that were dangerous and dark, this does not bode well for the 15th Legion. This does not bode well for the civilians of this city. I don't like what I'm hearing right now.
Forbidden practices were now indulged in, the means being justified by the end they would hopefully accomplish. Costs be damned. In the templums of the Corvidae, ritual sacrifices of Legion thralls and Prosperine civilians were undertaken so that the adepts of the cult might be lent enough power to scry the immediate future, discerning 6th Legion movements from the threads of potential realities spinning out of the Tizcan conflagration.
But at what cost? No. I cannot support this. I cannot support this. Sacrificing the citizens of Tesca to gain more power. Sacrificing, even, yes, they are your thralls, your servants, but still, to sacrifice them this way so that you can gain more power. No. This is not what I would support, definitely. You're no longer defending your people. Now you are using them as tools for your own victory. You're no longer protecting them. You're no longer serving them. You're serving yourselves. The citizens of Tesca have to contend now with the 6th Legion killing them and their own supposed protectors, the 15th Legion, sacrificing them for their psychic powers.
In the arcology of the Athenians, similarly brutal arts were invoked, but this time on captured enemies. The telepaths of the Thousand Sons tore at the minds of captives to extract any remotely useful intelligence they could. No potential route was closed to the Legion. Magnus remained silent within the pyramid of Photep, and the leadership, under First Librarian Ahriman, was actively encouraging the usage of techniques, arts, and skills previously denied to their subordinates, or even themselves.
You disappoint me, Isaac Ahriman. You disappoint me. I thought you were here to defend your city and your your people, but instead you're just here for your own personal ambitions. You also want to achieve, greatness through your psychic powers, allowing yourselves to delve deeper into these forbidden arts for your own pleasure. Very disappointing.
And it was working. Both the Corvidae and the Athenians were able to supply the fellowships and circles of their legion currently engaged with detailed strategic information, which, in combination with Tizca's portal network, was allowing the 15th to run rings around the embattled censure host. The 3rd Tyrannic Auxilia, fresh from their landings at the starport, were, for example, completely surrounded by the 9th Fellowship and almost entirely obliterated in a single engagement. A Legio Custodes force of some 500 companions under Valdor himself was similarly ambushed, this time by a massive detachment of Thousand Sons Terminators and Legion Dreadnoughts of the Order of Ruin. While faring much better against a sudden attack than the Auxilia had, the conflict was nevertheless exceptionally brutal, and effected a significant blunting of the Captain General's advance against the Magdan Free Corps at the Palatinate Mansions.
Oh, so the Magdan Free Corps is still operational. They're still alive. Okay. I thought by now they would be destroyed, but it's interesting to hear that they're still kicking.
Elsewhere across the city, the 11th Great Company of the Vilca Fenrica were tied down by waves of Thousand Sons ambushes, but also the sudden appearance of what appeared to be a civilian militia. Whether these were volunteers or simply mind thralls slaved to the Thousand Son Psychers in desperation, but the waves that crashed into the death kin of the Morkai served their purpose.
Sorry guys, there's something wrong with the video. But yeah, let's continue.
Depleting the ammunition reserves of the Great Company at the cost of thousands of lives every minute. 6th Legion units had no effective counter against the Psychana of the Thousand Sons.
Okay, from what I understood there from the video breaking up, it seems like there was a local militia that was fighting against the Space Wolves. And now Oculus Imperia is not really sure whether they were mind thralls of the 15th Legion or were they just genuine people of the city of Tezca. You know what? From what I've been hearing in the beginning in terms of the 15th Legion sacrificing people to gain more power, I would not be surprised that these people were controlled or manipulated by the 15th Legion to charge against the 6th Legion Astartes. Because, anyone would know, you don't just charge towards an Astartes. You don't just charge towards them. No matter what type of weapon you might have in your hands, you don't just charge an Astartes. They are cladded in their ceramite armor. They have bolters. They have other melee physical weapons that could just smash you into pieces. Even the Spire Guard knew that they can't just charge Astartes. They went into defensible positions to try and hit them from distance, and fall back into, into cover, into different locations should their forward operating bases be destroyed, or attack positions be outdone by the 6th Legion. They made sure that they were able to attack from a distance and retreat when necessary. Now, if this was a local militia, they would have also thought of the same thing because, they are citizens. They can see that Astartes are huge, bulking masses of firepower. So there's no way that the civilians would just charge against the 6th Legion. So there have to be mind thralls. They have to be these manipulated human beings that the 15th Legion are controlling, and they are sending them off to their death as meat bags or meat shields, a distraction, to tire down the 6th Legion so that the 15th Legion can come in on the last minute and just finish off the job, or to distract the 6th Legion to a point where they can't focus on the Astartes that are, pinpointing targets on them. So I would not be surprised that the 15th Legion are the ones who just threw these human beings to their deaths, fighting against the 6th Legion. I would not be surprised. Very disappointing. Very.
The famous tenacity and bloodthirstiness was the only edge they yet retained in a fight that was now thoroughly even if approaching overwhelming odds. Leman Russ, Primarch that he was, could only be in one fight at once. The rune priests of the Legion, their own psychers whose craft had continued despite the Emperor's Nicaean edict under some form of ill-defined Fenrisian cultural exemption, proved thoroughly outmatched by the magister savants of the Thousand Suns. What limited counters the shamans employed were brief respites, inevitably overwhelmed in short order by the defenders of Prospero, who, once they had identified enemy psychers, redoubled their efforts to dispatch them. The 15th Legion had drawn a defensive cordon around their Templum arcologies that no amount of pressure from the censor host seemed to be able to crack at this time. Managing to force a rough transmission through the squalls of interference using a Legion Mastodon's communication array, Leman Russ almost begrudgingly ordered those wolves that remained in orbit to make planetfall with immediate effect. The Wolf King was clearly set on hurling what every last Astartes he possessed at the Prosperine, throwing off whatever restraint had remained in the censor host's operation in favor of a full and total engagement with all Imperial assets on hand. The resistance of the Thousand Suns and the powers they were unleashing rendered them, to Russ's eyes, not even wayward scions of the throne, but maleficarum.
I would say that they're also cowards. I called Leman Russ and his tactics of trying to lure the 15th Legion out of their pyramids by using the deaths of civilians as cowardice. Because I would have wanted him to go directly to those pyramids, land right on top of them, and begin his assault. But instead he used the civilians to lure out the 15th Legion. Now, the 15th Legion are using civilians to gain more power through their psycho arts. I call that cowardice. Killing people and using their essence for your own gain like this. It is wrong. So not only are they maleficarum, but they are cowards in my eyes as well. Very disappointing. Very, very disappointing. Coming from this legion, the legion of logic and knowledge and understanding. And this is how they use it. By manipulating their own civilians, by using them for the sacrificial arts. Like, I can't defend you guys. I can't defend you guys. I really can't.
Wretches all, corrupted and lost to the sorcerous powers they were now wielding with utter abandon. Purgation was all that Russ could countenance now, and he would offer no mercy to those who opposed it. Prospero was to be scoured clean of all life, be it Astartes or mortal. By the word of the Wolf King, the Seventh Great Company, the Black Cull, the destroyers of the Sixth Legion, were ordered to deploy their most lethal and proscribed ammunition and weaponry, and employ whatever dark technology they had drawn from the Magi of Beta Garman.
And you know what's so sad about all of this? Is that the civilians, the innocent people, they have got nothing to do with this. They are not the ones who destroyed the webway. They are not the ones who are going against the Edict of Nicaea. They are simple people, just going about their lives, doing their jobs, surviving on Tesca. They are not the ones at fault. It is the 15th Legion. It is Magnus the Red. That is where Lehman Russ should focus his attention on. Leave the civilians alone. Target the 15th Legion. They must pay for what they have done. And Magnus the Red must be arrested and be taken back to Terra. That's all you should be focusing on, not annihilating the entire planet. I think you've done enough. Prospero is burning as we speak. You've done enough. Let the civilians survive through this nonsense. And you focus on the 15th Legion. You focus on their Primarch. There's no need to kill everybody. But, sometimes I forget the type of government humanity is led by. Sometimes I forget how the Imperium of Man conducts its military operations. Nobody is safe. Everyone is going to die. It's a kind of like a collective responsibility.
No stone was to be left standing, and no human to be left alive. Interestingly, an operation of similar mien, but altogether more obfuscated visibility, was currently underway, at the behest of 16th Legion Overseer Boros Kern. The appearance of the Sons of Horus contingent at the Beta Garment Muster had made for a surprising addition, and one that was unknown previously to both the Terran and Fenrisian forces of the Censure Host. Launching with the Vilca Fenrica reinforcements from orbit, the Sons of Horus deployed not to the front lines of the fight against the Thousand Suns, but to nominally pacified regions of Tizca, alongside their Chthonian auxiliaries. Boros Kern, his intent questioned by some within the host, stated that the course of the operation was to employ the Sons of Horus's famed adaptability to hunt 15th Legion ambushers that had been plaguing the advance of the Wolves, and, given the casualties these ambushers had already reaped, few expressed anything beyond mild annoyance that such a large force of 16th Legion Astartes, some 5,000 in number, were required for such a task.
Yeah, 5,000 Astartes in a pacified region. No. Something smells fishy here. Something smells fishy. What are you guys going to do? What are you guys really going to do? No.
Rather than seek out the Order of Blindness, as he had stated he would, Kern and the Sons of Horus instead began rounding up any and all civilian refugees they could lay their hands upon. Herded into massive, improvised pens, any who resisted were immediately and bloodily executed, or mutilated and left in prominently visible locations as a warning against other potential dissidents.
And why are they abducting the civilians of Tezca?
Within these holding zones, Sons of Horus overseers, with attendant magi of the Mechanicum, began moving through the terrified prisoners, scrying them with strange devices and medical apparati, even as a battle for the city raged around them. Those few that were selected by the Sons of Horus were shoved or hoisted bodily by Astartes into waiting sea-green ships bearing the eye of the War Master, and transferred rapidly off-planet to the orbiting cruiser that accompanied the 16th Legion expedition. Once this had been completed, the remaining refugees learned of their fate as artillery shells started falling in their midst, detonating bodies and buildings with equal abandon, as the Sons of Horus sought to expunge all trace of their curious operation. That we even know of this is due only to the most fragmentary of records, as well as operatives from the Sigillites' later Knight-Errant Investigative Division. This latter body, formed during the heresy years that would fast approach, hypothesized that since Prosperine humans had a startlingly high level of psychic genomics, some 10% of the population at early Imperial estimate, the War Master was, through the chaos of the burning, extracting psychically sensitive humans for reasons known only to himself. Certainly this theory holds merit, as during the heresy, the sons of Horus, as well as the 17th Legion word-bearers, made widespread use of mongrel cult divisions, amongst whose ranks dwelt a high number of, frankly, insane rogue psychers.
Wow. The civilians are being killed by the 6th Legion. The civilians are being sacrificed by the 15th Legion. And now the civilians are being abducted by the 16th Legion. They can't catch a break. They can't catch a break. It's terrible.
Should these poor Prosperine civilians have been quietly exfiltrated to be part of some hideous traitor breeding program, whose works would only bear fruit years later, well, it speaks volumes to the degree that the War Master was already orchestrating assets for a conflict still gestating within his cankerous soul. As Russ was ordering the wholesale extermination of Tizca, due to the apparent descent of the Thousand Sons into sorcerous madness, Valdor too sought to unleash his most potent forces, albeit with a far greater degree of logical clarity to his decision-making. However, by a twist of fate, some had been deprived from him. Upon managing to establish communications with the Custodes flagship, the Captain General discovered that the Ordo Sinister, the Psi Titans of the Emperor's secret Titan Legio, had already deployed, without any apparent orders, by their own merit to investigate the complete disappearance of the god engines of the Legio Mortis.
Okay, I understand that. But do you need all 5 Psi Titans to do that? I mean, one should be enough, right? One should be enough. The other 4 can help Constantine Valdor on the planet, in the city. One should be enough. Why do you need all 5?
Who had themselves been deployed to investigate the Mechanicum Forge Fane of Shao Arcad that existed without the city limits. It appeared for all the world that this demi-maniple of the Legio, the War Master's most favored Titan Legion, had simply disappeared in the process, whether or not this was due to some sort of sorcerous ploy, or that they had met their fates fighting against the Iron Vigil of the Legio Praesagius was completely unknown, but it appeared that the Ordo Sinister favored the latter. Without the Psi Titans at his disposal, Valdor was forced to turn to the one remaining specialized force he possessed, the Silent Sisterhood. 2 options immediately presented themselves. The Captain General could spread the Null Maidens of the Sisters across the entire city, granting localized pariah anti-psyker protection to the most Censure Host assets possible.
In terms of the area of effect of the Sisters of Silence, how big is it? Is it like, can one Silent Sister project their psyker nullification within kilometers, or is it just within a few hundred meters? And I'm just wondering about that. How big is their area of effect?
Or he could form all their hunter-seeker cadres, not currently engaged, into a spearhead, to drive into the lines of the Thousand Sons in one incredibly potent thrust. He opted for the latter, reasoning that the former, while a decent option, left the precious pariah sisters open to fragmentary destruction.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. Because if they are in smaller groups, the 15th Legion will just have to target the Sister of Silence alone, and then they'll pick off everybody else later on. But if they are in one group and they are the spearhead, protected by the custodians, of course, as well, they would be a far more dangerous and devastating blow for the 15th Legion to contend with. But I still go back to the area of effect. In terms, if the Sisters of Silence are all together, congregated into one force, does the area of effect amplify? Does it become even larger? So from a few hundred meters, it goes to a kilometer, maybe 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers of the area of effect. Is that how it goes, or what exactly? And in terms of the potency, if there's a very powerful psyker, will the concentration of the Sisters of Silence be able to nullify those abilities of that extremely powerful psyker? Or is it equal no matter whether it's one person or it's 100 sisters together? Yeah, I'm just wondering about that. Yeah, let's continue.
They were far too precious a resource to see winnowed away in any such fashion. He did, however, place a select number in nominal command of the spaceport to ensure it remained defended from the infiltrators of the Order of Blindness and to prevent such an important logistical transfer point from being denied to the host for potential withdrawal maneuvers.
I like this image, showing the Sisters of Silence. I think they're fighting against a dreadnought, not a Terminator, dreadnought Astartes of the 15th Legion, but they're not wearing any helmets. I'm worried about that. Yes, you can show your ponytail, and your faces and everything, but it's not really practical on the battlefield. You guys gotta wear helmets as well, because any piece of shrapnel can just strike you on the skull and you're dead. So yeah, guys, wear helmets. Wear the face mask as well if you need to do that as well, but wear helmets. It's important. But yeah, this image is really cool. How they're working together to bring down this dreadnought.
Valdor's primary purpose was, after all, bodyguard and life ward. He would never allow himself or any he commanded to be cut off entirely from the need of escape should that need arise. This did, of course, deprive many units of the Wolves yet engaged of sisterhood support. They were now fully forced to rely on their bloody-mindedness to continue the fight against the seemingly ever more dangerous Thousand Sons.
I don't think that's a problem for the 6th Legion. Yeah, the Space Wolves, they are ferocious, they are unyielding, they will continue to fight whether they have the Sisters of Silence by their side or not. Yeah, that's just the way they are.
The battles this created were, predictably, bloody and destructive in the extreme. The 11th and 13th Great Companies of the Wolves, combined to force almost 10,000 strong, were led into the southern districts of Tizca by the so-called Uplander Jarl, Torm Gudaric, believed to be the last surviving Terran of that rank remaining within the Legion. Arrayed against them was the Great Vulperine Bastion, a fortress outpost that commanded the Great Sesostrian Canal. Should that arterial fall, an ideal assault route to the central districts of the city would be opened up for the censor host, and both sides knew this. Supplemented by siege engineers from the Carinid Sentinels' Imperial Army detachment, the Wolves flung themselves at the Thousand Sons defenders of the Fifth Fellowship, unleashing Phosphex munitions specifically tailored to burn and melt Imperial ferrocrete. The living fire was battled in turn by Thousand Son sorcery, the Magisters of the 15th Legion using kinney shields to contain the almost unstoppable substance or redirect it to their foes.
Oh, that's interesting. So they've developed a kinney shield meant for personal use. The kinney shield is not only the shield that protects the city, but it can also be shrunken down to be used by, an Astartes, essentially. Oh, okay. Wow. That's quite impressive. Yeah, like I said before in part 2, the technology being developed in this city, really, it could have benefited the Imperium of Man. But now we're going to throw that away, the type of technology that's been developed here. The gates that they use to teleport from one location to the next, and the kinney shield. I'm sure there's many other psyker-related technology that's been created in the city that could have been beneficial for the Imperium of Man, but all of it is going to be lost or destroyed completely in this burning of Prospero, which is also unfortunate, truly.
Despite being outnumbered almost 3-1, the defenders held fast, that desperation turning to resolve and spite as they laced the besiegers' positions with psychokinetic mines and aetheric lightning arcs, reaping a fearsome tally of wolves and caronids alike.
I've seen this image before, and it's still cool. And at least this Sister of Silence is wearing a helmet, and she's having a mask or a visor protecting her face as well. So yeah, I've seen this image before, and it's still cool, really. Yeah, it's amazing.
This pattern was now one repeated throughout the city, as, largely deprived of anti-psyker measures owing to Valdor's maneuvering of the Silent Sisterhood, the attackers ground to a bloody stalemate against the fury of the Thousand Sons' defiance. In the Argent Bastion to the north, the Second and Third Great Companies had similarly encircled a Thousand Sons detachment, but were held at Bloody Bay. While atop the Sanctuary Mount, another force of Magisters were pulverizing the waves of Imperial auxilia that menaced them, the Censor Host attackers only holding due to the presence of Legio Custodes sodalities amongst them. Even the most forward elements of the Wolves, under Russ himself having torn great wounds in the flanks of the Temple Arcologies of the Corvidae and the Raptora, were bogged down and unable to make any progress. The Thousand Sons knew none amongst them were a match for the Wolf King, their common sense easily overcoming any pretensions of pride. So instead of engaging the Primarch and his Varigir directly, they opted for a blizzard of hit-and-run engagements through the Warp Portal network.
I was just thinking, if this was in reverse, if the Space Wolves met up with Magnus the Red on the battlefield, they would not, devise plans of trying to attack the Primarch. They would just go directly straight forward to him and, as many of them as possible to try and overpower him and kill him in the process. But here the Thousand Sons are like, no, we can't deal with you in the traditional sense. We need to figure out a way to neutralize you using our technology. Yeah, it's quite interesting how these two legions would act in terms of fighting against the Primarch. If it was the 6th Legion, they would charge directly ahead. If it's the 15th Legion, they want to sit back and think about how they're going to proceed in attacking a Primarch. Yeah, that's my assumption, guys. I'm not 100% sure if the Space Wolves would just go directly ahead for a Primarch, but their attitude, their way that they are presenting themselves, it makes me think that if they were fighting against a Primarch, they would just charge directly ahead. They wouldn't try to devise a plan on how to get the Primarch into a trap and then kill him that way. Yeah.
In tandem with telepathic adepts assailing the forward Censor Host forces with illusions and phantasmic terrors. The Wolf King, despite his Emperor-wrought senses, was caught in lures, directed to and fro from illusory engagement to actual ambush, with each of the latter claiming enough wolves to be bleeding the forward companies of vital manpower. It was, however, not so much succeeding as simply proving adequate. The Primarch was still a Primarch, and his most experienced wolves still amongst the deadliest killers in the galaxy. These actions were holding them, yes, but could only do so for so long, and the Thousand Sons knew it. As the Wolf King tore through each diversionary skirmish, the fellowships and circles of the 15th Legion hit the dogs at his heels with all they could muster, knowing time was ill on their side. Truly, the only real success made by either side during this stage of the invasion occurred on the grounds of the manors. The Magdan Free Corps yet held, largely thanks to reinforcements from the Thousand Sons. But the renewed assault they now fell under combined the forces of almost all Silent Sisterhood divisions present upon Prospero. Where the Magisters had previously been able to tear even Legio Custodes vehicles apart with raw mental aggression, their powers now failed them. Psychic fire sputtering to nothing, telekinetic barriers cracking, telepathic wards sundered.
So basically, they've pulled the plug on the Psychers and their abilities, essentially. Yeah, and I'm also quite surprised to hear that the vehicles that the Custodians are using are also being destroyed by the 15th Legion. They wear Automite armor, right? The Custodians wear Automite armor, and I'm assuming their vehicles are also made out of the same material. So I'm quite surprised to hear that the 15th Legion Astartes, those who are Psyker gifted, if I can say that, are able to rip apart those the vehicles. Yeah, because automite armor, I'm assuming it is a very durable, material compared to ceramite. You know, yeah.
Such a concentration of sisters had never before been seen abroad across the galaxy. And here, the sheer intensity of the combined null effects, augmented by a dozen of their most potent Oblivion Knights, stole the power of the warp from all within a significant distance.
I like that name, Oblivion Knights.
The warp portals relied upon for maneuvering were similarly disabled, as the barrier between worlds was closed tight by the presence of the sisters. The Thousand Sons were, however, still Astartes. Their gen-enhanced capabilities and martial training could still allow a small number to conquer a world in years past, and in the burning gardens of the Palatinate Manors, there were gathered nearly 6,000 of their ilk, including a force of Scarab occult Terminators and armoured columns from the Order of Ruin.
Yes, it is true that they are Astartes before they are Psykers, and yes, they can still be a very powerful force to contend with, but they are dealing with custodians now. They're not dealing with Astartes. They're not dealing with human beings, like mortals. No, they're dealing with Astartes. This is a totally different gameplay. You are playing on their field, on their turf. This is their forte. The custodians will rip you apart. No matter how powerful you may be as an Astartes, even without your psychic powers, still, there is no chance for you here with these golden-clad men. And you have to also add in the Sisters of Silence. They are no pushovers. They are also very deadly, powerful, warriors that are protecting the Emperor, just like the custodians. So yes, they are powerful Astartes, but it will not be enough. That's what I think.
Now arrayed against 500 custodians and 2 full vigils of Silent Sisters. Within moments of their initial charge, it was apparent to the Thousand Sons that they stood no chance of victory. Dozens of 15th Legion Astartes were lost to inflict even a single casualty upon the peerless Custodes. The action became, instead, a stand of defiance and of potential opportunity. If the Captain General himself could be wounded, or at the very least as many of the Sisterhood's Null Maidens dispatched as possible, then the Prosperine could at the very least claw some recompense from the inevitability of their deaths.
I can understand killing as many Silent Sisters as possible, but going directly to Constantine Valdor, how are you guys going to do that? How? It's foolish. It's really foolish, but yeah.
The spearhead straight towards Valdor was bought at savage cost. The blade scions of the Thousand Sons, Amitara Occult, over 100 strong at the beginning of their fatal advance, numbered a mere 30 by the time they reached the Captain General. But reach him they had in fact accomplished, even deprived of their psychic talents. The blades they held, so used to feeling etheric energy, were still capable of slicing through auramite armor.
Wow. Guys, how strong is auramite armor then? This actually brings into question how strong this metallic alloy is compared to ceramite. Because I thought auramite was superior to ceramite armor, and to anything that is made out of a ceramite material, like blades or spears or shields or anything else that's made out of ceramite material. Yeah, I guess I don't really know how strong auramite material is compared to ceramite, but it's quite interesting to hear that even Astartes can cut through auramite armor.
These 30 Astartes bore down on Valdor with pure desperation, knowing only their brotherhood stood a chance against such an individual. The Captain General slew them all, in their totality. But not without cost, as a sole Astartes managed to wound the first of the 10,000. It had been a conflict conducted at truly transhuman speed. Mere minutes had seen the 6,000 Astartes that had charged the Legio Custodes force annihilated, but the Auric champions of the Emperor had paid for their victory.
And I'm also not worried that Constantine Valdor got wounded. He can regenerate. So it's not a complete train smash. Yes, it was a gallant effort by the 15th Legion to try and charge and, get Constantine Valdor. It was not going to succeed, like I predicted, because it's a custodian and it's the Captain General of the custodians. You don't just beat this guy, even with 30 or 100 people. You just don't. It's not that simple. So yeah, it's not a complete train smash. He will regenerate. He'll be fine.
Scores of custodians had died, even their biology unable to overcome the wounds inflicted upon them by the rage-mad Thousand Sons.
I am really surprised, really, that they were able to push that far, all the way to the Captain General. I am surprised.
Valdor himself was wounded. Perhaps, even more seriously for the censor host, some 500 of the sisterhood had perished. Despite all this, the Custodes continued to press forward, now turning their attention to what remained of the Magdan Free Corps, who, despite hours of resistance against the wolves, were completely wiped out by this new assailant.
So the Magdan Free Corps is finished now, permanently. Okay. They fought. They really did fight against the 6th Legion, and they were pushing them back, and at least with the Magdan Free Corps, I can say that they were trying to defend the city. They were trying to defend the civilians against the 6th Legion, unlike the 15th Legion, where they are using their own civilians to gain more power by sacrificing them. At least with the Magdan Free Corps, I can say that they tried to defend their people. Well, it's not their people, but they tried to defend humanity in the city, the citizens. Yeah, they tried something.
Route was now secured to the heart of Old Tizca, Valdor assigning hunter cadres of sisters to immediately move upon the district to rob the Thousand Sons infiltrators of their abilities that had allowed them to tie down the wolves of the Black Cull as well as the newly engaged Sons of Horus. What remained of the 15th Legion within this region was quickly dealt with, finally caught by retributive censor host elements, now releasing the wolves and the 16th Legion both for movements towards the central districts, and Russ's ongoing push towards the Temple of Magnus.
The Temple of Magnus is the Pyramid of Photep, right? Okay.
At this point in the burning of Prospero, Imperial estimates declare that the Thousand Sons had, despite their powers, lost some 30,000 Astartes, either to wounds too great to overcome, to combat deaths, or to capture, which, considering the censor host summarily executed all prisoners, was death. While the invasion force had taken similar number of casualties, theirs was a reinforcement pool much deeper to draw upon, and within territory nominally under their control had been established numerous field Medicae outposts for the wounded to be transported to.
I did talk about this in part 1 and part 2, that the variety of forces that the Central Host has in its command will completely overwhelm any type of defensive forces that Tezca can muster up, because the 15th Legion is the only Astartes Legion on the planet and in the city of Tezca. The auxiliary forces are human beings, mortals. They cannot compare to Astartes. They cannot compare to custodians, not even close. They cannot. And then you have other, divisions of the Imperium of Man that are also part of the Censure Host. So they're being overwhelmed at every turn, and they're being outgunned at every turn by the Censure Host forces.
While the Thousand Sons had their own facilities, such was the desperation of their defense that few of the Order of the Jackal, the Legion's apothecary and cultural division, remained within their templums to receive those who needed their ministrations. The Censor Host could, in short, absorb far more losses than the Thousand Sons could afford to, as with each scion of Magnus that fell, the Legion's ability to hold ground diminished, pushing...
But you know what? In terms of the Sisters of Silence, how they've just lost 500 of their own, and the Custodians, they've also lost a few of their own. I think in terms of those forces, they're not as numerous as the 6th Legion. And they are very important to the Emperor, There aren't that many Custodians. They're like around 10,000. And in terms of the Sisters of Silence, I don't know how many there are in totality, but also they're not that many. So when it comes to these two particular forces, it's, every one of them is important. Every single one of them is important. The loss of one of them is truly devastating. So I would say that, considering that the Custodians and the Sisters of Silence are such a rare breed of warriors in the Imperium of Man, it would be very important to highlight that they are not going to be as numerous as the 6th Legion, and any loss coming from their side is a serious loss for the entire Censure Host. But in terms of the 6th Legion, yes, they can lose a lot of their own people, but, they can be replenished far faster than the Sisters of Silence and the Custodians, at the end of this entire debacle, I think. Yeah.
Them further and further into Tizca. Valdor's deployment of the Silent Sisterhood as almost one force was a gamble that had paid dividends. Leman Russ now counted at his side a wing of the Oblivion Knights, those sisters whose pariah effect waxed the strongest and whose abilities with it were more honed. With their arrival, no longer could the Thousand Sons maintain their illusory misdirections. No longer could they hide from the Wolf King's sight, and his impact upon their now revealed front lines was nothing short of cataclysmic. Upon the 2nd and 8th Fellowships, hurriedly fortified within the precincts surrounding the Raptora arcology, the twin hammers of Valdor and Russ would fall. Some 10,000 Astartes were ranged against the commanders of the Censor Host, yet through them was carved a trail of purest slaughter. The Varagir and the Black Cull both followed in their wake, with annihilation in their hearts, turning the center of Tizca into a sea of blood and fire, death and misery. Should any Thousand Son have lived to bear witness to this renewed offensive, one must have wondered if they had any capacity yet to believe their legion would triumph over such rampaging gods of battle. That is, of course, until one of their own awoke.
Until one of their own awoke? Magnus? Is he waking up from his meditation?
Canis Vertex was a warlord-class battle titan, formerly of the Legio Astorum. It had been enshrined in a position of great reverence by the adepts of the Pyre cult atop their arcology. Having fallen in combat with the Kamenka Troika during the Great Crusade, the warlord had been declared a loss by the Legion. But the Pyre, unwilling to see such a paragon of destruction be rendered to scrap, requested its retention as a combined museum piece and honorary statue. It had not moved since its destruction. Its machine spirit had long departed, as had its connection to the motive force. It possessed no crew. It possessed no power. And, at 1523, 73400M31, it stirred. Balefire loped and played across its now motile limbs. while a pulsating eldritch light appeared to glow within its core. Its incarnation heralded a renewed fury from the Prosperine skies. The aetheric storm now vent its fury in thunder and wind that tore Censure host aircraft from the air like the playthings of children. Canis Vertex howled, not the blast of a titan's war horn, but something far more ancient and primal. The fire, now surrounding its limbs, moving like liquid across its entire form. Its resurrection was, of course, no feat of the Mechanicum, but a blasphemic transgression of the machine god's doctrines, wrought by the captain of the Sixth Fellowship, Calophis, who also held the rank of Archmagus of the Pyre cult. Within the...
Now, for them to power up this Warlord Titan, I'm sure it cannot be done by one man, one Astartes Psyker. It just can't. So, definitely, they were sacrificing people to get the power they need to power up that Warlord Titan. It's an abomination. It's an abomination, and I hope the Censure host will be able to destroy it and kill this Astartes who instigated, this plan of reactivating this Warlord Titan. He must die. Let me just write down the name of the Warlord Titan. Canis Vertex. Okay. Warlord Titan. The people.
Temple arcology the profane warlord had just torn itself free from. The 1,000 sons of the cult had torn open a portal to the Immaterium and siphoned the energy of the warp itself to fuel the god engine's wrath. Should recovered records be believed, Calophis was in fact literally incarnated within the machine spirit of the Titan, his body lying recumbent within a crystalline throne at the heart of the Pyre's temple.
So he transferred his consciousness into the Warlord Titan. Wow. Quite impressive if it weren't, being done with such terrible dark arts. But yeah, it's impressive.
His pyrokinetic abilities, however, were now the font from which the power of Canis Vertex could be directed. Though its guns lived once more, its reactor flush with power to fuel them, Calophis instead opted to channel the fury of the living flame through his new body of metal.
But shouldn't the Sisters of Silence be able to negate this, situation with their blank powers, if I can say that? Shouldn't they be able to nullify any form of psycho energy that's manifesting in the Warlord Titan Canis Vertex?
The sheer influx of immaterial energy appeared to reinvigorate the powers of those 1,000 sons yet engaged with the forces of the Censure host. And, should any of them have bothered to question its source, they appeared to care not.
So, the Warlord Titan is a walking battery. It's a walking battery. I don't know how large its area of effect is, but the Astartes that are within its vicinity, those belonging to the 15th Legion, can now access their Psyker abilities because, they're in close proximity to this Warlord Titan that is exerting this Psyker energy. Wow. But I'm still thinking about the Sisters of Silence. With their abilities, should they not be able to negate this entire situation? Or maybe they need to be in a group once more, like how they did it in the beginning as one force, one arrow, directed towards the 15th Legion. Maybe all the sisters need to congregate once more and do the same maneuver and just attack this Warlord Titan together. I'm sure the potency of their blankness would, eliminate the power of the Warlord Titan. Yeah,
The wrath of the warlord reborn smashed through the null defenses of the Sisterhood, who even now were hard-pressed to contain the resurgent Legion elements. Where the censor host had been poised to deliver killing blows in multiple theaters across Tizca, they were now, suddenly, upon the defensive. The anti-psyker capabilities they had wielded, overwhelmed by this unexpected blasphemic reversal that even now strode towards their lines with purest annihilation kindled in its baleful heart.
This is quite a surprise. Really, truly, this is quite a surprise. You know, I'd never thought about something that could overwhelm the nullification of a Sister of Silence, you know. A psychic power that is able to overwhelm it and deactivate the nullification of a Sister of Silence. That's really powerful and dangerous. And this is where the sinister, the Ordo Sinister Titans would be useful at this very moment, you know. That's why I was asking, like, why do we need all 5 of them to investigate that matter with the other Titans that were lost? Why couldn't it just be 1 investigating that matter while we still have 4 landing in the city and dealing with this new threat, this Warlord Titan? Yeah.
Had this managed to dissuade Russ or Valdor from their advance? None have ever seen evidence. The spear of the Emperor and the Wolf King still remained upon the offensive, pushing now into the depths of the temple arcology of the Raptora, both that they may bring the magisters that remained there within to destruction, and to move them out of the punishment of Calophas's incendiary wrath. The arcology was currently being defended by 15th Legion Astartes under the command of captains of the 2nd and 8th Fellowships, Phocis Takar and Aura Magma. The former was the Magister of the Raptora cult, the most powerful Telekine within the Legion, while the latter was Calophas's second in the Pyre. Both set upon their attackers with fury and power unbridled, Aura Magma's fire melting the armor of Varagir Terminators to liquid, as Phocis Takar bodily charged both Valdor and Russ, his kidney shield completely turning aside all munitions that spat at him as he charged.
Wow. 1 Astartes dealing with a Primarch and a Custodian. You know, the Captain General of the Custodians. Wow. And he's still alive. He's still, fighting against them. Quite impressive.
As the 2nd and 8th captains both engaged the lords of the Emperor's censure. Elsewhere in Tizca, 7th Fellowship Captain Fail Toron found himself and his Astartes hopelessly pinned between the advancing wolves of the Black Cull and the warriors of the Legio Custodes. Of the 7,000 Astartes under his command mere hours beforehand, only 3,000 remained alive, and even then, these survivors were not concentrated under their captain but scattered throughout the city after the collapse of the portal network. Magister Toron counted a mere few hundred at his side, and even these, loyal, dogged few, were perishing despite the powers bestowed upon them by Calophas's bestriding idol. Surrounded by the baying of the wolves and the clinical precision of the Custodes, soaked in the blood and viscera of his own brothers, what had once been Fail Toron broke. It is perhaps surprising that the trauma and insanity of Prospero had not done so to any member of the Legion until that point. Perhaps it had, and it was only the intensity of the etheric conflagration that was different in this instance. Perhaps it was a testament to the willpower of the Thousand Sons up to this moment. But for whatever reason, Fail Toron simply surrendered himself to the warp in its totality. All mental barriers were dropped. The tight mind hold through which all psychers must channel the immaterium was released.
Would he not be susceptible to demon possession now, if he's letting go of all of his mental blocks?
As a living conduit for the aether force of the warp, Toron became a force of total destruction, annihilating those Imperials around him with coruscating lightning that flowed through him in a torrent, until his body simply dispersed, atom by atom, into nothingness.
Okay. Is it the flesh change? Is it back? Not really surprising, because Zinch lied to Magnus the Red about curing the flesh change. So yeah, it has to be the flesh change. If he's not being possessed by a demon and his body's just disintegrating, then it has to be the flesh change. But I think he went out far quicker than some of his brothers who also, suffered through the flesh change, because they turned into some hideous looking, screaming Astartes. They were in serious pain before they died. So yeah, the fact that he just disintegrated into dust, it's quite different, I think.
After action reports around this chronomark record a significant number of psi abnormalities amongst the Thousand Sons. And while Fel Toron was included in these, subsequent examination reveals that it was at this moment that the Thousand Sons, as a legion, perhaps even as humans, ended. The flesh change was a curse born of the Thousand Sons almost since their inception. It had, they had believed, been cured by the work of Magnus the Red, who had cast the full might of his peerless mind against the condition. He had succeeded, or so all who knew of it had thought, until the death of Fel Toron. From the epicenter of the seventh captain's disintegrated body there now emerged a wave invisible, moving ever outwards, a malignancy cast against the genetic coding of the Thousand Sons and setting it alight. The return of the flesh change was as spectacular as it was horrifying. All across Tizca, the Astartes of the 15th Legion felt their flesh rebel, and watched in abject shock as their brothers succumbed to grand malmutations at astonishing speed. Reforming into shapes unspeakable, the bodies of those changed still convulsed with the torrential power of the immaterium, becoming psychic tumor things that lashed out in blind idiot pain at all around them.
Wait, they were still alive? They didn't die? Because usually that's what happens, you flesh change, you go through that experience, that pain, as your body, rejects you, if I can say that, and then you die. But these guys are still alive, and they're going through this transformation. Oh, God. Oh.
In the Raptoran arcology, the change tide hit Aura Magma first, turning the captain into a revolting amalgam of fire and liquid meat, sending him running through the halls of the Templum screaming as his flesh and soul burned with a fire that would not let him die. Phocis Takar, furiously battling Constantine Valdor, swelled with monstrous potency, his body erupting in form until it had become a towering abomination who threw itself at the Captain General with unnatural fury. It is said that, before the killing blow could be struck, the former Phocis Takar was made aware of his aspect, and in revulsion of what he and his legion had become, willingly dropped his defenses, allowing Valdor to plunge the Apollyon spear into what passed for his chest.
And throughout all of this entire situation, where the 15th Legion are now, being cursed by the flesh change once again, the Primarch is nowhere to be found. Magnus the Red, the Primarch who promised that he would protect his sons, that he would help his sons with the flesh change, is nowhere to be found. The Primarch is in his pyramid, busy meditating or whatever he's doing in there, while his sons are transforming into these monsters. I don't understand him. I don't understand what's going through his mind. Where he allows his planet, his city, to just be destroyed like this. Where his people are being used. They're either being killed, they're being sacrificed, or they're being abducted by the 16th Legion. And now his sons are also transforming into these monsters. I don't understand him.
All across Tizca, it is estimated that at least 10% of all Thousand Sons succumb to the flesh change within a minute of Fail Toron's apotheosis. But, and I note this despite advice that it should not be committed to official record, there remains evidence that the change was not restricted to the 15th Legion alone. Information contained within the archival stacks of the Silent Sisterhood note that, as the Thousand Sons succumbed to mutation untrammeled, so too did changes make themselves apparent upon the bodies of the wolves. Translated from Sisterhood Thoughtmark, the records speak of ogroid things in the shape of lupine creatures that warred with flesh-changed and Imperials alike in the grounds of the Raptoran Pyramid. More berserk wolf than man, these beasts heeded no words, and may have been mistaken for some of the Thousand Sons afflicted had not their aspects been so eerily similar to each other, and some of their limbs had not still been clad in the dull grey of the Vilca Fenrica. The wolves have, throughout these last 10,000 years, furiously and violently denied that any such occurrence took place, or has ever taken place. They have worked with not insignificant diligence to ensure that official accounts do not refer to even the possibility that what genetic atrocities emerged on that night could have afflicted those of the 6th Legion, but I, for one, am reminded once more of the saying, "There are no wolves on Fenris."
I also don't believe anything that the 6th Legion, is stating about these Astartes that are transforming into werewolves. I don't believe when they say that this never happened. I believe in the Sister of Silence. Those who documented or those who have reported about what they've seen on the battlefield. I believe them because the Sisters of Silence have no reason to lie. They have no purpose, they have no reason to lie about what they've seen on the battlefield. But the 6th Legion do have reasons to lie. To protect their image, to protect their honor, their code, or the pride of the 6th Legion. They don't want to be labeled as genetic abnormalities. They don't want to be considered as freaks. So of course they will try and keep this as a secret. They would suppress any evidence on the existence of these werewolves within their legion. So I believe wholeheartedly what the Sisters of Silence have been reporting. They have no reason to lie. Just like the custodians, they have no reason to lie. I will always believe the custodians. I will always believe the Sisters of Silence.
Further elucidation on this point will remain for another day, but for now, I will trust the word of the Silent Sisters over a legion whose vested interests remains to this day in presenting themselves as Adjusticars during so fell a day in history. As the change wrought its hideous work upon central Tizca, Canis Vertex was ploughing northwards. Seeking to crush the wolves' beachhead, Calophus steered the god engine towards the concentric ring of stormbirds in the Portlands, which, despite a total communications blackout, was still serving as a demarcation point for ammunition reserves ferried from orbit. No enemy stood against the warlord. The titans of the Censure hosts had met their fates elsewhere. Its advance was heedless, each stride demolishing whole swathes of the city more totally than even the work of the Black Cull. The tanks of the wolves that ranged their firepower against it were just targets to the lashing flames that spun off its limbs. The sensor host air power that continued to mount attack runs on its hull were not even worthy of consideration. It was no external enemy that felled the thing Canis Vertex had become. What failed Tauron had unleashed would lay it low. The power required by Calophis to maintain his control over so vast a thing as a warlord titan, torn and rent by devastation emerging from the central districts. Without the mind of the Magister to effectively wield it, the aether fire that had replaced the beating reactor of Canis Vertex flew wildly out of control, blooming into an explosion like nothing anyone present had ever witnessed. Buildings across the city that had withstood the apocalypse of hours now fell under the pressure wave. The Titan's corpse crashed into the temple arcology of the Corvidae, sundering that ancient structure under its calamitous fall, while at the summit of the Pyre arcology, Calophis himself was granted one final instant of awareness before arcane feedback turned his body into a fiery conduit.
Good riddance. Good riddance.
The resulting detonation destroyed the Pyre's pyramid from within, and caused untold devastation to the areas surrounding it. Local reality, or what had passed for it upon Prospero for hours now, ceased to function. What can only be described as a localized warp storm emerged over central Tizca for all to behold. The sky became the color of heartbreak. Lightning, the shade of trauma and captured loss, tore across it. Space-time ceased to be in any true sense. It is at this point that all chronometric marks entirely fail.
It must be, the veil between the immaterium and the materium world. It has weakened because of the concentration of psyche energy and the battle that's occurring on Prospero. Really, it has weakened that veil, and now, the immaterium and the materium are clashing, in existence in the same space, essentially. Yeah, I think it's something like that. Like a, what do they call it? Warp storm. Yeah, something like that.
What was to come, and how long it took, little is certain. All we have are accounts, fragmentary video logs, and tales that, were it not for the sheer horror of what was unfolding, would be discarded as dreams of madmen. Local reality in Tizca was now an open wound, a rent in space-time from whence the powers of the warp spewed and festered, worming their eldritch tendrils into the fabric of creation to pervert and corrupt. Linear chronology ceased to function in any meaningful capacity. All chronometric marks from this point on are useless, as two timepieces held side by side would record completely conflicting time streams. From the ships of the Censor host still in orbit, it appeared for all the world that the City of Light had been swallowed by a roiling contusion on the face of the planet, a sickly haze of clouds the color of things that simply should not be. All within this pocket of nightmares appeared from without to be hazy, incoherent, almost dreamlike in aspect, and any who entered were either not seen from again, or emerged with hours or seemingly days having passed in the minutes since they departed. No.
So this warp storm only affects the planet. It's not the entire solar system. Okay? And, like the Censor host fleet that's up above in orbit are not affected by this warp storm that's being created. And it seems like time inside this warp storm is completely different from the time in local reality, if I can say that. Okay. All right.
No reports can be trusted entirely, if any could have even been made. All communication, be it mundane or arcane, from within or without, had been completely severed. Logisticans and strategoi, positioned above in the void, were helpless, sundered from all contact with the senior commanders of the host, and unable to even assess the progress that was being made. Their astropaths were all screaming, or at least those from whom the shock of the warp rift's emergence had not proved to be their doom. Many officers assumed that this was some sort of doomsday weapon unleashed by the 15th Legion, the final spite of Magnus the Red in the face of Imperial censure.
The 15th Legion is powerful, and so is Magnus, but they're not this powerful. No. This is like Emperor's level stuff, I think. Yeah. To produce something like this, no.
For they had all watched from afar the sheer fury with which the Thousand Sons had met the wolves and the talons of the Emperor with. All that could be done, however, was to log timestamps and await any word from the Wolf King or the Captain General. None would countenance their deaths. For the Lord of the Custodes to fall was unthinkable enough, but that a Primarch should die, such a thing was surely impossible.
Yeah, prepare for that, assertion to be challenged and then defeated. You guys are all in for a shock of your lives during the Horus Heresy.
Although it seemed that the impossible was becoming ever more dreadfully possible upon the damned world of Prospero. A large part of Tizca was, albeit difficult to ascertain from orbit, not affected by the warp storm, only obscured from the void by its visual and auspex interference. There, what Imperial elements remained in infrequent contact with the vessels above were issued perfunctory orders to continue with their previously assigned missions, and were assured, albeit with little confidence, that the censor host was still very much in control of the situation. Whether these instructions were followed or not depended entirely on the ears of those they reached. The Black Cull, for instance, did not precisely heed the words of the orbiting strategoi, but followed their previous mission out of sheer bloody-minded battle lust, continuing the sack of the temple arcology of the Raptora cult, bathing the pyramid and its surrounding areas in torrents of phosphex. The 12th Great Company, however, seemingly disregarded their orders, and immediately plunged into the storm to seek their Primarch. The Sons of Horus continued with their purgation operation completely unopposed, either by the forces of the host or the Thousand Sons. At the Valpyrine Bastion, the resistance of the Thousand Sons had collapsed after the change wave triggered by failed Tauron had hit. The Magisters within the Bastion were now having to fight their once brethren, those changed in flesh, as much as any Imperial elements without. The Carinid Sentinels and the Wolves both, seeing their opening, renewed their barrages, now unmitigated by the Kinney shields of the Thousand Sons. They reduced what remained of the Bastion to dust in short order, burying the raging 15th Legion Astartes beneath hundreds of tons of ferrocrete-reinforced marble. As resistance from the Thousand Sons' pockets, yet without from the storm, crumbled, 6th Legion elements, within mechanized transports, as well as the swift-moving Custodes grav tanks and jet bikes, sought to run down whatever magisters they could find, to free up all possible censor host forces that they may surround the warp rift, or even enter it, and lend aid to their Captain General and the Wolf King. Before one relates what will no doubt be the climax of this most terrible of chronicles, one must elaborate on the means of tracking precisely what occurred within the storm. In point of fact, I cannot use the word precisely, for such a thing simply cannot apply to such an event. All that we are able to establish has been reconstituted from as many sources as are available, but all are fallible in the extreme, especially when faced with the sheer power of the Immaterium in the manner seen upon Prospero. One need not remind acolytes of the unreliability of personal accounts, either from those who had vested interests in representing a certain perspective, such as the wolves, or those for whom certain concepts simply do not enter into the framework of their constructed thoughts, such as the Legio Custodes.
I I understand what Oculus Imperia is saying. However, I would still take the words of a custodian and a sister of silence in far more higher regard than any word from a space wolf or any human being part of the auxiliary forces that I've joined in the censure host, or any other, eyewitness, that belongs to the censure host. I would not take their accounts, as seriously as the custodians and the Sisters of Silence. Yes, it's not 100% accurate, and yes, you would need more evidence, more information. But, with what you have currently at your fingertips, I would take the words of the Sisters of Silence and the custodians far more than any other, because, like I've said before, they have no reason to lie. They are focused on their missions. They are not clouded by emotions and ambitions and desires. They are there to do a mission and complete that mission. And whatever they see during that mission, it is what it is to them, as they understand it, how they understand it. They are not going to, tell us tall tales or give us some sort of explanation that makes no logical sense. They will say what they understood and what they've seen on the battlefield, and I will take them. I will take them into my confidence, not the Legion, the Space Wolves. No. They are compromised. They will protect their Legion no matter the cost. And they will lie for their Legion as well. Just like with the situation with some of the Space Wolves having genetic abnormalities, transforming them into these werewolves. They will do whatever means necessary to protect the reputation of their Legion. They are compromised. So I will believe anything custodians and Sisters of Silence will say on this matter. They are not driven by emotions. They are not driven by pride and some sort of arrogance. They are clear in what they have to do and how they have to do it, and how they understand everything that is happening around them.
Worse yet, there are translation errors, such as the inherent difficulty in rendering Silent Sisterhood Thoughtmark into High or Low Gothic. Beyond that, Vox screeds are almost incomprehensible, even those logged in high-gain field apparatuses carried by certain legionaries.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, what about, video evidence through the visors of the Astartes? I'm sure they have cameras in their masks. I'm sure even the Astartes have cameras in their masks. I'm sure there are tanks, there are other vehicles that have video recording, abilities. So also that can be taken in as information, right? Doesn't only have to be Vox chatter that is, another form of information. There must be also video evidence.
Has been recovered often contains cascades of static, fragmentary orders, in some cases orders that were only issued hours after their transmission had been recorded, and in a lot of cases, screaming. Screaming that is disturbingly human, and at the same time, not. Orbital tracking.
It must be those 15th Legion Astartes that are, being consumed by the flesh change, or 6th Legion Astartes that are transforming into werewolves, maybe, yeah.
The battle, as mentioned, was either conducted visually or by Auspex pings of ident tags, but was completely futile. All sensorium data, where it could even be logged, made utterly no sense at any given time. Even neurocortical interrogations of captured prisoners or volunteers from the censor host itself only ever revealed glimpses, and often ones that directly contradicted all other information I have previously mentioned.
They've captured prisoners? I thought they weren't going to capture any prisoners. I thought everybody's going to die. Surprising. Okay, I wonder who these captured prisoners were. Were they Astartes, or were they just the regular, civilians of the city?
Or even each other. There are independently verifiable accounts from many sources that speak of heroic battlefield actions performed by warriors that had previously perished earlier in the conflict, or accounts that assure that certain individuals had perished despite it being beyond doubt that they survived this final stage of the battle. In summation, all is confusion. This truly was the impossible battle. All the facts surrounding it defy all attempts at logic, for such is the nature of the Imperia. It undermines the means by which reality itself functions. What hope do we have of sanely structuring accounts of anything that is involved with it? What threads I, your humblest servant, have managed to weave together here is merely because I stand upon the shoulders of greater individuals who have come before me and are now past. What work you will hear.
It's good that you have recognized their contribution, Oculus Imperia. That's good.
Here may contradict what you have previously known. I can only say that this work is done with the best of scholarly attention and ability, and represents all a humble chronicler may do in the face of the terror of this lunatic universe. At best estimates, the vortex caused by the death of the warlord Canis Vertex and its erstwhile master, Calophus, had swallowed the core of the censor host, containing the Primarch Leman Russ at the head of some 12,000 of his wolves, Constantine Valdor and around 400 custodians, and approximately 1,500 null maidens of the Silent Sisterhood, as well as 2 cohorts of the Tyrian Exoguard Auxilia Regiment. Ranged against them were some 7,000 of the Thousand Sons, as well as Spireguard divisions of disparate size. The 15th Legion was now commanded in its near entirety by 3rd Fellowship Captain Hathor Mott and 1st Librarian Azek Ariman, all of whom had fallen back to a new defense cordon set between the arcologies of the Athenaean and Pavani cults. The greatest concentration of these forces was around the Pyramid of Photep, to which thousands of civilians and routed Spireguard still sought to retreat as the final bastion available to them. The establishment of this cordon had largely been aided in the chaos that was caused by the emergence of the vortex, as well as the appearance of seemingly thousands of mutates within the reaches of the city. All of this, however, merely slowed the advance of the censor host. It did not stymie it. The 6th Legion had faced down the worst horrors of the galaxy in their 2 centuries of campaigning, and the Geno-engineered Legio Custodes were literally constructed to pay such things no heed. Russ and Valdor knew that momentum could not be spent. Both constituted whatever forces they could under their direct command in the face of total communications blackouts, knowing that all other elements were moving to the same objective they were. Naturally, many censor host units were simply unable to link up with the main bodies of Russ and Valdor. Some were lost to the unnatural eddies of reality that the vortex tossed around like churning water, cursed to wander aimlessly through fractally repeating ruins until the warp squall blew out. Others were yet engaged with disparate units of Thousand Sons, forced to fight vicious, unrecorded miniature wars as creation was cracking around them. As some records noted, larger bodies of troops caught in the eddies were often forced to fight the remnants of these petty wars, for such was the fury of some engagements that those who survived it found it impossible to ward off the coming of the flesh change.
Man, the Immaterium really is just chaos. It's really just chaos. The anomalies and how people are, in these anomalies, how they're stuck in their own time zones or time existence, and they're fighting against 15th Legion forces or the 6th Legion forces or custodians or anyone else, and it's not corresponding with what's happening in another part of the city where they're experiencing time differently and space differently. Yeah, it's just a mess. It's a chaotic mess. And I can see, why it's so difficult to, get accurate information about what's happening in that city during this specific time. Yeah, because everywhere else has got their own time zones, their own little theaters of war, and it's just a chaotic mess.
Many hundreds, indeed likely thousands, of debased creatures roamed the ruins of warp-choked Tizca, horrifying amalgams of tumorous flesh or feral beasts in the shapes of wolves. Their origins unknown, no longer mattering. The one aspect that slowed the censor host advance was the wariness of what psychic assaults they may face once they threw themselves at the Thousand Suns once more. Consequently, Russ and Valdor attempted where possible to organize their forces into columns, at the core of which stood cadres of Silent Sisters. Such maneuvering, under total lack of communications, was laborious in the extreme, granting the 15th Legion even more time to shore up what defenses they could around the Pyramid of Photep. Such precision care was, for the host, ultimately unnecessary. When the battle was joined, when the fury of the censor host was brought to the lines of the Thousand Suns, they were answered with entirely mundane bolter fire, as opposed to the eldritch howling of warp fire and arcane lightning. The 15th Legion seemed to be eschewing their powers, and one must only assume that the terror of the flesh change stayed their hands in that regard.
Oh, okay. All right, I understand. Yeah, I was also asking, why aren't they using their powers now? I mean, they've been using their powers since day one, and now all of a sudden they're, hesitant in using them against the enemy. But now that Oculus Imperia is explaining that maybe they were afraid of the first change, it's understandable why they're just resorting to bolter guns.
Initially, it appeared that this final battle would be fought as of old, with bolter and blade and raw transhuman rage. But as the heavy transports of the wolves crashed through their lines, as the siege artillery of the host annihilated their redoubts, many of the magisters of Prospero abandoned their restraint and their lives. Loosing the power of the warp through their bodies, their powers heightened now to undreamed-of levels, they vent their hate upon the wolves who, in perhaps predictable fashion, had abandoned their silent sisterhood protectors in a bloodthirsty rush to engage the foe. The Thousand Suns that did, died, hacked to ruin by their once brothers, once their sentience had fled and their minds became as broken and corrupted as their bodies. Yet in these sacrifices time was bought and vengeance was reaped. 3 times did the censor host throw itself at the lines of the Thousand Suns, and 3 times were such attacks repelled. Yet the numbers of the 15th Legion thinned with each assault, 7,000 dwindling to 5,000, the bodies of their fallen mixing with grey-armoured wolven dead to form barricades of ceramite-encased flesh, behind which the defenders prepared for yet another offensive. Cohesion was lost, units scattered, circles and fellowships mingling with no heed to any sort of formation. A scarab occult Terminator would stand shoulder to shoulder with a 15th Legion line Astartes, both covered by a spire guard human with a heavy weapon. Grim equanimity found at the edge of oblivion. It was then, as the silence had fallen, as a breath was drawn before the plunge, that he came at last. The Crimson King.
Why? Why now? Why don't you just stay in your pyramid? Why are you coming out now? Why now?
Magnus the Red. Had any words been exchanged between the brothers? One can find no accurate record of it. Janisha Kroll, Knight Commander of the Silent Sisterhood, who witnessed the eventual conflict between Primarchs, stated that Russ and Magnus did indeed speak, briefly, but as to what was said she knew not. Others who beheld the arrival of the Crimson King disagreed with the Soulless Queen's account, stating that the two Primarchs immediately flew into combat, with nothing but the Wolf King's howl to announce it.
I believe the Knight Commander. I believe the Knight Commander. They did speak before they commenced battle. I mean, the Primarchs like talking to each other, like boasting to each other, like, throwing their emotions towards each other. They like talking. So definitely, what the Knight Commander is saying is true. They talked before they started fighting.
This is just the beginning of the disparity between accounts of this confrontation. All appear to have been warped in some manner, both through the mythic aspect such a fight between demigod sons of the Emperor will seemingly inevitably take on, and through the reality-shredding tempest that surrounded the Pyramid of Photep. One focal point of agreement, however, is that the clash began with a howl of purest rage from the heart of Leman Russ. Beyond that, we once again return to incoherency, although this is partly due to the sheer unparalleled speed at which Primarchs are capable of engaging each other at. Of those present, it is likely only the Legio Custodes, perhaps even only Constantin Valdor, who possessed any biological capacity to follow and process the sheer speed of their bodily movements. Golden Axe met Silver Blade with a fury that shattered sky and air. The cold rage of the Lord of the Russ meeting the psychokinetic mastery of the Crimson King. Nothing survived contact with their combat. Not the architecture of Tizca, not the hulls of tanks, not the plate armor of Astartes. Any of the latter that somehow sought to intervene, to aid their gene-father, to protect them, were simply annihilated before the combatants were even aware that an attempt had been made. The full force of Russ's martial skills were being leveled directly against every iota of Magnus's psychic might. Neither gave a hint of quarter. But even given all that was being brought to bear to bring him low, even given the titanic capacity for etheric destruction made possible by 2 centuries of his brother's arcane learning, it is unlikely if there could ever have been any victor other than Leman Russ. It is a general hypothesis that the Primarchs, nothing survived contact with their combat. Not the architecture of Tizca, not the hulls of, not the plate armor of Astartes.
Sorry guys, I just had to do something. So I'm back now. Hopefully I didn't skip a lot. I just rewinded just a bit, just to make sure that I don't lose where I left off. Yeah, okay, let's continue.
Any of the latter that somehow sought to intervene, to aid their gene-father, to protect them, were simply annihilated before the combatants were even aware that an attempt had been made. The full force of Russ's martial skills were being leveled directly against every iota of Magnus's psychic might. Neither gave a hint of quarter. But even given all that was being brought to bear to bring him low, even given the titanic capacity for etheric destruction made possible by 2 centuries of his brother's arcane learning, it is unlikely if there could ever have been any victor other than Leman Russ. It is a general hypothesis that the Primarchs were built to fulfill a specific role that the Emperor had in mind. While Magnus's may only have been known to his father, Russ, perhaps more so than any of his brothers save the Lion and Angron, was clearly a weapon designed for destruction. In the hell that had come to Prospero, in the etheric tempest that was tearing at the roots of all things, perhaps none but him could have so thrived. Though the Crimson King tore at his brother, wounding him on planes material and immaterial both, it was to Russ that the final blow fell. Some related it as the plunging of his sword into Magnus's torso, but the prevailing account holds that the Wolf King bodily heaved his brother aloft and cast him down across a brutally armored knee, sundering the back of Magnus the Red and defeating the Cyclops of Prospero utterly.
Yeah, this is the favorite move of any Primarch, breaking their enemies on their knees. Yeah, to be expected. Okay.
At this moment, this instant played across a billion instances. It is related that a light suffused the entire pyramid of Photep, bringing illumination to an area that had until that moment appeared perched upon the precipice of a night eternal. It had no source, seemingly filling the air itself with an incandescence that was indescribable. Many presumed it a final trick of Magnus, but the Sorcerer King appeared utterly unconscious, maybe even dead, and was in no state to be casting some form of esoteric incantation. If it could be said to emanate from anywhere, the sanctum of the Crimson King appeared the origin. But such identification proved impossible as the light reached a blinding intensity that forced all who beheld it to turn their eyes away, to dull armor auto-senses, lest it burn their retinas in its brilliance. The storm, however, did not simply end, but now appeared to have a new locus. Howling winds began to form a vortex centered on the pyramid of Photep, tearing gales shearing away rubble and masonry, and even toppling armored tanks.
Definitely this is the doing of the Chaos God Zinch. Yeah. I'm sure in this time, after Lehman Russ broke Magnus the Red's back, he was still alive, and in his weakest, darkest moment, that's when Zinch came to him, giving him this offer of servitude, and he will save his life, he will save the lives of his sons. And Magnus agreed, and now Zinch is doing something. It's like, yes, finally I have a Primarch. Yeah.
Many relate that it was at this moment their Vox networks, previously silent or static, were invaded by a cacophonous choir of whispers, while others claim they heard naught but booming, wicked laughter. Yet others say that upon the winds was born the death howl of the world itself, the pain of a planet condemned to oblivion, and that cracks in the skein of creation began to rend themselves apart, ghostly fingers of things abominable intruding upon reality from the unknowable beyond. Shards of existence splintered, dimensions fracturing and inverting, slicing at minds and flesh as knives. To many, it must have no doubt seemed that the Crimson King in his passing had broken the rules of all that was and is chaos. But it would not last. The light snapped out of being, the storm, bereft now of its locus, faded. As if a flame had been put out, local reality reasserted itself. The bleeding of physical laws staunched. The Vox now exploded with frantic activity, ships in orbit and sensor host formations across the city hailing their commanders with urgent requests for information. Those commanders, and those of the host yet alive within the former eye of the storm, surveyed the ruination around them. Of Magnus the Red, of his 1,000 sons, there was not a single sign. In the aftermath of this clash titanic, little was clear. Constantine Valdor immediately ordered a full sweep of the ruined Pyramid of Photep with all available resources, Imperial and Mechanicum both, to attempt to determine what had occurred. The area of the city had contained over 3,000 surviving Thousand Sons, and an approximate number of elite and veteran Spire Guard auxilia. There had also been as many as 10,000 civilians cowering in subterranean fanes and catacombs. In total, some 20,000 humans and transhumans had at one moment been present, and now simply were not. This was not merely...
Wait, including the humans? So Zinch not only took the Astartes and the Primarch Magnus the Red, but the Chaos God also took the humans. Why? Where is he taking them? Oh my gosh. Are they also going to be existing in the warp with the Astartes and the Primarch? Basically, it's from the fry pan into the fire, essentially. Oh gosh. They're probably going to become like thralls or some sort of demon creatures. Yeah. Poor people. Really, the civilians in this entire situation have been trampled. They have been trampled upon by these powerful forces. You know, it's either they're being killed, they are being abducted, they are being sacrificed, and now they're being transported into chaos, into the warp. Like they can't catch a break. They can't even escape. They can't.
That they were dead. There was literally no trace that they had existed in the first place. There were no bodies, no scraps of clothes or armor. Nothing. Even weaponry capable of disintegrating a body in an instant, such as thermite armaments, would leave scorch marks. Radphages and viral cascades typically left an organic residue or slurry in their wake. Adepts of the attended Mechanicum Tagmata, well versed as they are in the arts of annihilation, as well as those of the 6th Legion's Black Cull, were completely baffled, able to draw no conclusions as to what weapon or device the Thousand Sons or their Primarch had employed at the end of all things. Such conclusions that could be drawn at the time were only able to posit that the arcane was at play here, as it had been throughout those cataclysmic final hours. But as to how, nothing could be said with anything even remotely resembling confidence. At 1917 at local time, on 7:34:004 M31, the Censor host's ground forces succeeded in making contact with their ships in orbit. Vox networks were re-establishing in the wake of the warp storm's passing, the ugly wound upon reality having disappeared along with the Sorcerer King and his legion. Conflict, however, still continued in the devastation of Tizca. Not every Thousand Son had vanished. Isolated bands yet persisted, fighting hopeless retreats to some indeterminable, perhaps even imaginary fallback location.
So Zinch didn't take everybody. He only took people within the precinct of the pyramid of Photep, essentially. You know, the Astartes that were around there, the Primarch, and the civilians that were inside the pyramid. That's all he took. Everybody else, good luck. Wow.
Roving bands of mutates continued to attack all they encountered. While Russ gathered his wolves into hunter-seeker units, fresh reinforcements, in the form of knights from House Malanax, took to the field, the powerful war suits proving more than a match for the gibbering horror things that flung themselves at anything that moved. As many as 2,000 of the 15th Legion still remained within the Argent Bastion, at the eastern end of Tizca's walls, all that remained of the 8th Fellowship, as well as a significant number of psi automata of the Castellax Achaea mark. Their resistance lasted for maybe an hour after the fall of Magnus the Red, before they withdrew to the Bastion's lower reaches, effecting a hit-and-run retreat in face of a punitive offensive of Varigir Terminators and Legio Custodes Sodalities. The fighting was only ended when a blank-eyed Leman Russ, operating it seemed on more rote than actual drive, took to the tunnels, butchering every single Astartes he could find, with a dispassionate ease that would have been contemptuous if it's had any emotion behind it whatsoever. From the records of some of the custodians present, had the Wolf King been any other than a son of the Emperor, his behavior may have pointed to severe trauma. But of course, such a thing was not possible.
Right.
Elsewhere, in the ruins of the Valpurine Bastion, a division of Thousand Sons had emerged, having protected themselves from the Citadel's collapse through a superlative series of overlapping kinetic shields. Instead of bothering to engage any wolves or custodes within the area, these Astartes, now under the command of a line officer named Sul Contep, took to the Citadel's airfields to make flight-worthy whatever aircraft they could. When their presence was eventually discovered, and Censor host forces dispatched to their location, The Magisters had managed to evacuate in their totality, packing what ships they could with civilians that remained alive within the area. Departing out over the Valpurine Sea, they utilized the ash and steam clouds present to mask their exit.
You know, this frustrates me. This really frustrates me with the 15th Legion and their conduct on their own homeworld and how they treated their own people. The civilians never had the opportunity to escape. They didn't have the space or the safety of the 15th Legion to allow them to escape. But now, when everything has turned upside down, it is the 15th Legion that is escaping from this entire situation. Yes, they have some civilians with them, which I'm not really confident about what's going to happen to them, you know. They're probably going to be killed, sacrificed for them to gain more power. They're going to use them as meat bags or meat shields or some sort of tools to be used. I can see that already. But really, it just irritates me. The fact that this Legion didn't really primarily focus on protecting their people, making sure that they're able to get out of the city, making sure that they're able to find transportation to take them off the planet, making sure that they defend their people instead of using their people as batteries to power their psychic abilities. It's so disappointing. I liked this Legion. I really did, because I also liked what Magnus the Red was trying to, initiate in terms of research, in terms of cataloging information, in terms of understanding the warp, in terms of creating new technologies that are a amalgamation of psyche and technological prowess, you know, and his logical mind, and his belief that, you know, the Imperium of Man can become a far more brighter and harmonious place. But his Legion has just destroyed that image in me. The way they have descended into this depravity, the way they use their own civilians this way. And now some of them have the audacity to leave behind whatever left of the Legion that's in the city. And what are they going to do when they're out there? Are they going to try and look for their Primarch or the 15th Legion? They're going to be heading straight into chaos. Or if they don't look for their Primarch, they're going to become these, what are they called? Rogue Astartes or renegade Astartes? You know, these pirates that just roam around space, pillaging, killing, and getting resources and then leaving. You know, just being a menace to society, essentially. The people truly have been trampled upon. The soul of humanity on this planet has been trampled upon by these powerful forces. People who claim that they are here to protect humanity. They are here fighting for humanity. There's nothing like that here. Nothing at all.
While some were taken down by Legio Custodes Equinox interceptors, a great many disappeared from Imperial auspexes entirely. The Sons of Horus division of the host, having been entirely absent from the vortex in central Tizca, had now turned their operations to total purgation. Any who were not of the censor host were put to an unceremonious death, their corpses left to rot where they fell as green-armored Astartes spread out through what remained of the city. In the northern district, in the ruins of the Prosperine Air Guard's base of operations, the 16th Legion and several knights of House Malanax encountered survivors of the Spire Guard and a significant quantity of civilians under the leadership of Seneschal Prime Lucretia Elunirai, who had been attempting to effect rescue operations as best she could manage as her world fell around her.
Now, if the 15th Legion also helped and focused on that aspect, maybe there would have been some sort of success, but nothing. Nothing.
Believing her rank would grant her some means of parley, she voxed a demand to the commanders, Boros Kern of the Sons of Horus and Anrak Hadratha of the Space Wolves' Black Cull. She demanded the proper treatment of civilians and non-combatants under the Lex Imperialis, and for the surrender of her soldiers once they had thrown down their arms.
Lord Seneschal? Yeah. You forget the type of government you're being led by. Like me, I also forgot, sometimes I forget that this is the Imperium of Man. You forget the type of government that is, in control of humanity. You forget. And you'll be shown the error of your ways with your death. And the death of all of those civilians. Your planet and its people have been condemned. There is no rescue. There is no escape.
Boros Kern executed her personally, a single bolt round detonating the woman's skull like a ripe fruit, while Hadratha bathed the entire complex in phosphex, combining all within, soldier, civilian, child, to death by the fire that lives. The pitiless slaughter of every single civilian that remained within Tizca would continue for 3 days local time, including in its scope operations dispatched to investigate any potential Thousand Sons presence elsewhere upon the planet. What pockets at this point remained, usually handfuls of individuals, were treated to the same immediate butchery. By the time the sun sank along the smoke and ash-choked skies of Prospero's only city, nothing yet lived within its ruins. No plant, no animal, no human, no Astartes, no mutant. Valdor at this point ordered the evacuation of Censor Host forces, seeing no reason to remain, although Russ, in typical fashion, did not heed them. The Wolf King had resolved that his men would be the last to leave the planet. It was at this point, at the tail end of the evacuation, that the Thousand Sons that had fled across the Valpurine Sea re-emerged, making directly for the final Imperial transport arcs. Easily overwhelming the auxilia present, and completely unbeknownst at this point to the Wolves, the arcs made orbit, slipping past the Imperial ships in the Prosperine skies, most of which had been dispersed into a second bombardment formation. Loyalist destroyers dispatched to intercept annihilated one of the barks, but not before the remaining two killed all drive and power functions, their signals now becoming lost in the orbital debris that had spread out from the remains of Prospero's wrecked near-planetary void infrastructure. While sensor sweeps persisted for hours, no trace of the vessels could be found. It was eventually ruled that, as they lacked warp capabilities, those aboard would be rendered too helpless to effect anything of note, so they were simply presumed dead. Leman Russ was the final set of boots to leave the ground, his Stormbird dusting off from a shattered and ruined hellscape. As a final punitive act, a second orbital bombardment was conducted, incinerating anything remaining that could burn, ensuring that any of those who had somehow managed to escape the Emperor's censure would not live to celebrate their already completely hollow victory. As the ships of the censor host slipped anchor, Vox beacons were seated throughout Prosperine approaches, broadcasting the unmistakable Perditus Maximus signal. The Lex Imperialis had ruled this planet utterly forbidden. None may approach under pain of death. Thus was Prospero abandoned, a world corpse, a planet of ash and departed pain, a choked orb hanging dead in the void where no sound ruled save for the wind through burned bones. At best historical estimate, The cost of bringing the Emperor's writ of censure to Prospero was 30 million lives, of which the overwhelming majority were Imperial civilians simply present on the planet at the moment of the censure host's arrival.
I mean, imagine 30 million, all gone in less than 3 days. 30 million. I can't even imagine 1 million people in a small area. Now, 30 million, all gone. Hey. Truly, what a waste. What a waste.
Data logged within the administratum placed the number of civilian survivors at a net 0. The official line would forever be that the Prosperine branch of humanity, which had survived the turning of millennia, the terrors of old night, and the renewal of the Great Crusade, had been annihilated in its totality thanks to the follies of Magnus the Red.
To think, this entire civilization was here long before Magnus the Red, crash landed on this planet. He became its doom. Magnus the Red became this planet's doom. As much as they would like to think that he was, a great a being that was here to help their society attain higher heights of understanding and knowledge and progress, he was their doom. He was their angel of death. This society that has survived for so long after the age of strife, and how they've cultivated their community, how they've cultivated their identity on this very dangerous planet of Prospero. After all that they have done to survive, now they've been laid low by the Emperor and his progeny. And to think that there are many other civilizations during the Great Crusade that have also suffered the same fate. So many who do not want to follow, the Imperium of Man, and the what do they call it again? I forgot what they call their. Is it the Imperial Truth? I think that's what it's called, the Imperial Truth. How many of them, they believed in their gods, or they believed in any kind of faith-based organization or spirits or stuff like that. They all suffered the same fate, how they all just died out, killed off by the Emperor and his legions and the Primarchs. And now Prospero is joining in that group of planets that have just been annihilated. All of that knowledge, all of that history, erased.
The same was said for the 15th Legion, Thousand Suns. From 004 until a decade later, upon Terra, as the walls fell in 014 M31, the Legion was officially declared extinct. The truth, of course, is that neither the humans of Prospero nor its Astartes were all wiped out in one fell stroke. Notwithstanding the Astartes and civilians that had disappeared with Magnus the Red, there remained many thousands of both who had, through the vagaries of fate, been abroad across the galaxy when the doom of Tisca was wrought. Many were simply put to death by Imperial forces they were serving alongside, usually before news of the censure of their Primarch, or indeed his fall, had even reached them. In one prominent example, 2,000 Astartes of the 9th Fellowship under Centaur Rami were gunned down by the Ultramarines they served alongside. Similar justice was conducted by the Imperial Fists and the Salamanders, 2,000 Suns forces they had previously counted as allies, but had been explicitly instructed to slaughter.
It kind of reminds me of Order 66 from Star Wars. How the Jedi were also just gunned down by their, clone troops. It's just giving me that, image in my head of how these 15th Legion Astartes are fighting with their brothers and then all of a sudden their brothers, target them with their bolter guns and shoot them in the back or shoot them in the face. And probably the same thing is happening with, regiments coming from Prospero, where probably there was an announcement saying that all Prosperian Imperial Guard regiments are to come forward for inspection. Come stand in a line for inspection. And then, to their surprise, they're just all killed by Astartes or maybe other Imperial Guard regiments, just shooting at them. Or some person just having dinner or lunch or supper, or try to say breakfast in the cafeteria. Someone from Prospero is having breakfast in the cafeteria, then he just gets shot in the face. Just like that. People are being killed, those who come from Prospero. Just like that.
It's perhaps noteworthy that at no point did any of the Astartes committing this fratricide attempt to aid the doomed and unaware Thousand Sons in question. Some, naturally, escaped by their own devices, the prognosticators amongst them becoming aware of their doom before it struck, and for these few awaited a life, at best, of fleeing from the jaws of imperial retribution. The largest of these contingents, independently verifiable to history, were 5,000 Astartes of the Fourth Fellowship, constituting its majority, who immediately ceased their Great Crusade assignment and fled to the stars upon news of Prospero's demise reaching its expeditionary fleet. Elsewhere, several thousand sons of Magnus stationed on Prospero's client forge world of Shao Arcad similarly fled. Of the fates of these thousand sons, nothing can currently be said. In the chaos of the years to come, the threads of their stories are utterly lost.
They probably went to go look for their Primarch in the warp, maybe. Yeah, if they knew that, Magnus was teleported into the warp with the 15th Legion.
It's quite possible they may have reunited with their Primarch and their Legion before the siege had even begun. But it is equally likely many simply turned to a life of the renegade during the conflagration of the Horus Heresy. Perhaps siding with neither traitor nor loyalist. Perhaps they became Black Shields. Or perhaps they simply chose to survive as best they could in a world consumed by madness. In total, the censor host had suffered significant losses in its prosecution of the battle. Some 49,000 in total, and a massive quantity of armaments either lost or abandoned in necessity in the tomb of Prospero. This included several Titan god machines, much to the fury of the Mechanicum. Naturally, the majority of these losses were incurred by the Vilca Fenrica, some 25,000 confirmed killed in combat, as well as the entirety of its 13th Great Company simply declared lost in the collapse of the warp vortex. This was a significant amount of the 6th Legion's strength at a crucial time. The heresy would rupture into dreadful reality mere months later, offering the Legion no time to recover in any meaningful capacity from these losses. The casualties for the Talons of the Emperor, the Silent Sisterhood and the Legio Custodes, were relatively small and somewhat unverifiable, but when we consider the scale of their commitment to the host, and their rarity and specialities, their losses can still be considered severe by any measurable metric.
Yes, I've discussed about this earlier in the video, that, yes, their numbers might seem small compared to the Space Wolves in how many people they've lost, but because of their speciality and their rarity and the fact that they protect the Emperor, these guys and the ladies are very important. Losing just one of them is already a great loss. And the fact that 500 or so of the Sisters of Silence have been lost is also a tremendous loss for the Imperial household. It's a tremendous loss.
Some historians have even waxed lyrical on the loss for the latter formations, altogether less mundane. The status of custodian invincibility. Never before had such a large quantity of the Emperor's own life wards been committed to a single action, and
make no mistake, they are still invincible. Yes, they might have lost some of their own hero there on the battlefield, and it might have been like a lot, yes, but still, they are invincible. Make no mistake, they can still take you on and beat you.
Even in instances where they had taken to the battlefield alongside the master of mankind, rarely had more than a few fallen in pursuit of their goals. Those that had observed them in action, be they Thousand Son, Wolf of Rus, or Son of Horus, learned many a lesson from that day about just how the Custodes prosecuted their war-making, and notes were taken about precisely how they had fallen and when they did. On the Loyalist side, darker rumors festered, particularly around the ease and apparent experience by which the Auric champions of the Emperor had dispatched Astartes so contemptuously. Some, indeed, wondered aloud if this had been a purpose they had been crafted for, although such opinions, when expressed, were rarely done so to ears untrusted.
Look, yes, this is what they're designed for. The custodians are designed to be far more superior and powerful compared to the Astartes, just like the Thunder Warriors. When the Thunder Warriors, were no longer useful to the Emperor, they were exterminated by the custodians with the help of, I think it was the First Legion, if I'm not mistaken. So, yes, these guys are designed specifically to kill the rest of you. Those who are also, genetically altered and advanced superhuman beings like the Astartes. They are tasked to kill the Astartes, should anything happen. If the Emperor's plans worked out perfectly, the Astartes would be out of a job, because all of humanity would be going into the webway and living, in that alternate dimension. Therefore, the purpose of the Astartes will no longer be necessary. And like the Thunder Warriors, they would have headed down the same fate, extermination. So definitely the custodians are not only protecting the Emperor, but they are a fail-safe for when a possibility of rebellion from Astartes occur. And yes, with contempt, they don't like you. They don't trust Astartes. They see you as potential failures because you're driven by your emotions, by your ambitions, and you are not exactly what the Emperor would need to execute his plans because of your potential to betray, which has been clearly been shown multiple times. So the custodians don't trust you. The Captain General, Constantine Valdor, does not trust the Primarchs. He does not really like the Primarchs because they are also like their sons, where they are compromised by their emotions and their ambitions and their desires. And to the custodians, that is a weakness. So with contempt, definitely.
The ripples of the destruction of Prospero spread outwards from it, some discernible, others less so. So seismic an event in Imperial history could not simply go unnoted by the many, even if the Imperium's military regime did much to downplay its significance. A triumphal parade was held perfunctorily upon the censure host's return to Terra, one which Rus declined to attend.
A parade? A parade after killing 30 million people? A parade after destroying an imperial world? After destroying one of the jewels of the Imperium of Man, Prospero? A parade? For what? Why are you celebrating? Why are you celebrating failure? Because the Emperor ordered a censure of Magnus the Red, not the killing of the Legion, of the 15th Legion, and the killing of Magnus the Red. and the destruction of Prospero. This is a failed mission. Why are you celebrating a failed mission? I don't understand. Yes, sis.
His wolves elsewhere. Valdor's own journal notes that, according to the Wolf King, a king does not invite his blood-stained headsman to a victory feast, although to call it the latter was quite a misnomer. The emperor was deeply concerned with the loss of Magnus, it is supposedly said, and what it represented for his unknowable goals, declining in his personage to attend any victory celebrations such as they were.
You know what I don't understand about the emperor? Why isn't he calling Lehman Russ to account to what the hell happened on Prospero? Because this is not what I ordered as the emperor. I ordered for the censure of Magnus the Red and for him to come to Terra. I have written it in a document, I have signed it, I have stamped it, it's here. Why did you not follow it? Why isn't the emperor calling his son Lehman Russ to account? Why? Why isn't he calling Constantine Valdor to also further explain how did we come to this point where that planet has been destroyed, where 30 million people have been killed, where the 15th Legion has been shattered, the Primarch Magnus the Red is dead. How? How did it come to this? Who told you I wanted him dead? Who told you you have the last word as a Primarch? Who gave you the authority to use such weapons against Imperial citizens on Prospero? Why isn't the Emperor asking any of these questions to his son Lehman Russ? Why is he allowing him to continue going on his merry way, continuing on with the Great Crusade? Why is he allowing him scot-free on this entire situation? What type of emperor is this? And the High Lords of Terror have no power, have no say in any of these types of situations. In an empire that functions on rules and jurisdiction and precedence, there should be a body that is able to call in or rein in generals for them to account for the actions that they have committed on the battlefield. If it's not the emperor, then there should be someone within the High Lords of Terror who will be able to call in these Primarchs. But instead, we are being led by a family. We are being led by people who are protecting each other. An empire that is run by emotions. And the Emperor of Mankind thinks that he was going to succeed in having trillions upon trillions of human beings across the galaxy, comply with his vision and for them to head into the webway, when his entire empire is based on emotions, not logic, no accountability, no responsibility, nothing. What type of emperor is this? Oh.
The triumph ended on a muted note, with the courts of the Imperium moving rapidly to declare the Thousand Sons as Perdicia, all records of them to be expunged, all their property seized, all treaties they were privy to rendered defunct. Many worlds brought into compliance by the Legion, especially ones Magnus had sought to shape into visions of his ideal future, made strident objections in court to the Legion's destruction and subsequent expurgation. The representatives of these worlds made little headway, and, returning home, found that there were significant increases in Imperial Auxilia presences that was the only response they were ever to receive.
And I'm sure those people were assassinated by the official assassinorum once they returned home. I'm sure. For stability and for, neutralizing any potential of rebellion, those people were assassinated. And of course, more Imperial Guard regiments will be sent to the planet to make sure that there is no instability whatsoever. But definitely, I'm sure the official assassinorum was sent to kill those people too.
Michau Arcad, the Forge World long considered bound to Prospero and its legion, had long been on the boundaries of both Imperial and Mechanicum politics, conducting relations cordially, but rarely with both. In the wake of the censure, the world ceased all communication with both empires, bringing it within what most would consider to be a fraction of actual secession. Accusations flew between the Imperium and the Mechanicum of what exactly should be done with the recalcitrant Forge World, and it is likely only that the outbreak of the heresy prevented a full military expedition from being mounted to bring them once more into full compliance. Of the War Master, Horus Lupercal, little could be said about his reaction, had he made any form of response.
The man is happy. Horus Lupercal is happy. Very, very happy. He's satisfied.
The Prosperine affair had ultimately been one organized at the behest of the Emperor himself, despite the War Master's later opportune intervention. The raising of the censure host and its goals were done without any consultation with Horus, despite the Primarch being, supposedly, the ultimate military authority within the Imperium. Some academics have declared that Prospero and the Emperor's bullish ignoring of his son in its devastation was a contributing factor to the War Master's resentment and ultimate rebellion.
No. Nice try though, but no.
Such accusations honestly seem facetious to yours truly, merely for consideration with the benefit of hindsight of the events that were already in motion. Horus's fall was the cause of Magnus's actions that led to his censure. The War Master, made aware of this by his new allies, sought to capitalize. The mind of Lupercal, his die, they had already been cast when the Cyclops fell. Perhaps the most profound impact of the destruction of Prospero, besides those already recounted, was that the impossible had been rendered hideously possible. Astartes had killed Astartes. While 2 legions had already been struck from Imperial record, their loss is altogether another topic, and the circumstances by which they occurred are clouded with mysteries impenetrable. Prospero, however, was seemingly impossible to hide, a cataclysm in full view of those who had the power to see it. For all the detractors of Magnus claimed his was a circumstance unprecedented, what remained was the simple fact that, in later cases, the circumstance would be entirely precedented. Any one of the remaining 17 loyal legions could suffer the same fate, an existential shock that brought no small amount of disunity to an already fractious brotherhood. The wolves, for their part, drew the anger of many. As shatterers of this covenant of brotherhood, and unrepentant ones at that, they only succeeded in forcing themselves into further isolation, a pariah status they infuriatingly seemed to revel in, wallowing in a bleak reputation that seemed to grant them some measure of comfort as they processed their blackest of deeds. No matter that it had apparently been on the orders of the Emperor himself, the Wolves of Rus were now the only legion who had direct combat experience fighting the Legiones Astartes.
It's not under the orders of the Emperor. The Emperor didn't order the destruction of the 15th Legion. He didn't order the death of Magnus the Red. He did not order the destruction of Prospero. This is the commands of your Primarch. He did this. He ordered the action on Prospero.
And the Wolf King was the only Primarch to have ever fought one of his brothers to the death. Some would dub him Kinslayer. Had he cared, he gave no hint. The wolves, however, went one step further than merely garnering their experience. They actually codified it. Rendered from sagas and first-hand accounts, Legion serfs compiled the Codex Omega, a treatise designed to be the tactical and strategic reference should the Emperor decree the destruction in force of another Astartes legion. This was, of course, a direct and plain threat to the Legiones Astartes by the 6th Legion, and one whose contents were shared only with Horus Lupercal and his own legion as well.
Of course. Of course.
War Master. An error so unspeakably grave that Russ was later said to admit it was one of his greatest regrets. Almost every legion released immediate missives to the Emperor calling for the destruction of the Codex Omega, save for 3. The Iron Hands, the Night Lords, and the Alpha Legion all called instead for every legion to be given a copy. Certainly, the awareness of such a work caused significant discord among the legiones. Many shored up interlegion treaties with those they were closer to. Many worked to stockpile arms and armaments, or shifted around garrison forces in what could have been almost nervous agitation were they not Astartes.
And this instability, this distrust, this paranoia is all aiding Horus Lupercal in his future plans during the Horus Heresy. This is all aiding him. You played the game quite well, Horus. Well done. Well done. Unlike your father, you actually know your brothers. You know which one to exploit. You know which one to use properly, for your future plans. And you have done it quite well when it came to Lehman Russ.
The victor in this, as with almost all things concerning the Prosperine incident, was Horus Lupercal. The legions distrustful of each other, the executioners of the Emperor maimed and isolated, an unpredictable sorcerer king betrayed, wounded, and cast into oblivion, seeds of doubt in the Emperor's motives sown into the galaxy, all of this played into the War Master's hands. Had Prospero meant to stand as a noble upholding of the law of the Imperium, it instead was now forever to be remembered as a triumph of the traitor Horus. His first act, his first victory, even before blood had been spilled on the soils of Istvan. What, finally, of the fate of Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons? All at the time believed him either to be dead, or in a self-imposed exile of sorts. As his body was never recovered, nor any trace of his death identified, this was all that could be surmised. That was, of course, until the Siege of Terra, when his sundering of the outer walls and his gambit within the Imperial dungeon played out in all its dramatic tragedy. Magnus had survived Prospero, and yet persists to this day, even now, in corrupted damnation. How he accomplished such a feat is known only thanks to later, darker revelations about the 15th son's fall. His final sorcery on his homeworld was a wholesale transportation of himself, his library, and all of the surviving 1,000 sons, Spireguard, and Prosperine civilians in the Pyramid of Photep to another planet entirely. Sortierius, the so-called Planet of the Sorcerers, a damned world located deep in the festering reaches of the Ocularis Terribilis.
The Sortierius. Okay, let me just see if I can spell that correctly here. So, the civilians who were also teleported by Zinch or with the help of Magnus, they're also on Sortierius. Oh. I wonder what's happening to those people there, really. But they were going to die in Prospero. I don't know if they'll have a normal life in Sortierius, but yeah, I'm just gonna stop there.
The Eye of Terror. Had such an act been possible for Magnus himself, it would have represented a feat of psychic mastery that surpassed anything any human baseline Astartes, Primarch, or even the Emperor himself had ever accomplished or could ever have accomplished. Divisio Telepathica investigations, commissioned in the aftermath of the cataclysm in secret, projected that, even if Magnus had sacrificed the sum total of every psyker at his beck and call, the resulting psychonometric energy would only have been sufficient to transport a handful of individuals, not thousands. Early studies into this were curtailed by post-scouring imperial suppression. No one was, apparently, concerned with how Magnus had survived, and it is only thanks to inquisitive minds of later millennia that one has any body of scholarship upon which to build. Those long thousands of years taught humanity the pain of the primordial annihilator, the so-called gods of chaos, those eldritch intelligences that dwell in the deepest reaches of the immaterium. Many now believe that, as Magnus could not have accomplished his feat alone, at the moment of his death he opened his hearts to the presence of a force altogether beyond, that in that darkest of moments he embraced damnation that he might save his sons and himself from certain death. Should this indeed be the case, that power responded in kind, spiriting the Primarch and his legion away, to remain until this day under its thrall. Certainly, the Thousand Sons have over 10,000 years been under the many, many eyes of the Changer of the Ways, as Magnus himself has, recently renewed in aspect and apparently vigor, as he is in this darkest of millennia. The boons of such a patron would go a long ways to explaining how, a mere 10 years later, 3,000 Thousand Sun survivors became the approximately 10,000 accounted for upon Terra during the siege, although one author posits an altogether different theoretical. According to the theory of the first of the 15th, the power offered by the shifting many, at the moment, was one whose price was unforeseen. Magnus may have desired himself and his son saved, but the Changer did so by means rather different. It selected one amongst his legion, saving this individual, consuming all others, including maybe even Magnus, as fuel for this act. The Thousand Sons thus seen upon Terra, and laterally throughout the millennia, are merely duplicates, pale copies of those devoured by the shifting many in the final moments of Prospero.
I mean, why would Zinch consume Magnus the Red? He's a Primarch. You know, he would be the greatest champion of the Chaos God. Just like all the other Chaos Gods, they all have their own Chaos Princes, the Primarchs that have sold their souls to them and became their champions. So why would Zinch consume the soul or the essence of his champion and, just leave one Astartes soldier or Space Marine alive? What's so important about this one Astartes compared to the Primarch?
Aether stuff becoming part of its great games to be played out for unknown, abominably Machiavellian ends. There is, of course, but one who could possibly have been saved, and given all this individual has wrought over the years since, one cannot help but consider that this potentially insane-sounding theory may hold some merit. That individual, of course, is Isaac Ahriman.
I mean, is he loved by Zinch that much compared to Magnus the Red? They are definitely the Lord of Change. Or changes, yeah.
Maybe I consider this fancy only because the reality is so horrifying. That one of the greater intelligences intervened on the express wish of so far fallen a son of the Emperor himself. Magnus was, a shining beacon of progress in a universe that so despised a concept. Consumed by his ego, consumed by his follies, consumed by his arrogance, the price he paid would see the soul his father had forged for him consigned to a damnation eternal, and us, our humanity, alongside him. Istvan was the birth of the heresy, yes. But upon Prospero, it can truly said to have been begun. Emperor preserve us all, that we have lived to see its aftermath. Ave, Imperator. Gloria in excelsis terra. This video and this channel were made possible thanks to the very kind donations and support from my Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to help support the channel, head on over to patreon.com/Oculus Imperia. If you'd like to receive more updates about the channel and any future videos, you can contact me or follow me on Twitter @Oculus Imperia. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, comment, let me know your feedback, and as ever, thank you very much for watching.
Yeah, guys, that's it with the complete history of the burning of Prospero, Warhammer 40k, and Horus Heresy lore made on the Oculus Imperia YouTube channel. And this was a request from Noble Nighthouse Hapatrax. Thank you again for that request. But yeah, one of the jewels on the Imperium of Man's crown has been shattered. It's gone. It's never coming back. And those that have survived through this entire ordeal are either part of chaos, or they've gone into exile, or they've become renegade Astartes. And yeah, it's sad times, dark times, unbelievably painful times for the Imperium of Man. This is where it starts. And from this pain, from this failure, it will fester and grow during the Istvan 5 drop site massacre and continue on with the Civil War. And even after the Civil War, for the next 10,000 years, we are still going to be suffering the effects of the decisions being made by Primarchs during the time of the Great Crusade. Because like I said before, this civilization was unique. It was really advanced. They were capable. They understood the warp in ways that most civilizations during the Great Crusade could never truly achieve. Their people were psychers. A lot of them were psychers. That was a pool of energy and power and understanding and knowledge that the Imperium of Man would have needed in the future, especially when they would head into the webway. If the project was successful, they would be the guides, the teachers to the rest of humanity on how to maintain, how to control their powers, how to understand their powers and not necessarily fear them. They would have been great teachers for the rest of the Imperium of Man. but instead the entire planet is gone. Instead of targeting the 15th Legion and the Primarch, the entire population of the city of Tesca was erased. Honestly, I don't understand why Lehman Russ decided on that, when the innocent civilians have got nothing to do with this. They are not the ones who are using forbidden arts to kill space wolves. They are not the ones who destroyed the Webway project. They are not the ones who are raising their guns at you and shooting at you. It's the 15th Legion. The Spire Guard were defending the civilians, defending their home. The Magdan Free Corps were also there defending the city that they were stationed in. Your true targets were supposed to be only the 15th Legion and Magnus the Red. And even before any of that, your truest mission on Prospero was to arrest Magnus the Red, not try to kill him, not kill the 15th Legion. So, what's done is done now. It's too late. Nothing can be brought back together. Humpty Dumpty can't be brought back together. It's shattered. And the Emperor, like Magnus, all they can do is just sit and just think about what they have done or what they could have done, and not what they have to do. Magnus the Red should have left his pyramid and allowed himself to be arrested. That's something he had to do. The Emperor should have called his son, Lehman Russ, to account in his throne room. It's something he had to do, but he did not. He allowed his son to go on his merry way to continue on with the Great Crusade. Yeah, dark times for the Imperium of Man. But guys, that's it for today with the complete history of the burning of Prospero. Like I said, this is the final part, and it's over now. And thank you again to Oculus Imperia for compiling all that information in terms of the burning of Prospero and presenting it in a very informative and entertaining way, especially with all the images, all the Warhammer 40k images that we saw of the Sisters of Silence, the Custodians, the 15th Legion, Astartes, the Space Wolves, Primarch, Lehman Russ, the Emperor, and all these different locations and places that all involved with the burning of Prospero. So yeah, it was really, really good to see all of those images and also listen to the information or to the story centered around Prospero. And yes, thank you again to Noble Knight House Hypertrex. I'm sorry that it's taking me so long to react to all three parts. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully you will understand that I'm also doing other things. I'm not just here every day reacting to videos on YouTube. But thank you for being patient. Thank you to everybody else also for being patient, and I am sorry that it took so long. But yeah, guys, that is it. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Oculus Imperia's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you guys next time. Okay?